What is a supernatural event that happened in your life that just cannot be explained? A family friend of ours, Gary, was terminally ill with cancer. He was a father figure to me and one of the few adult males from my previous life. I am a recovering alcoholic that fully understood me. A friend and myself were in Moab, Utah and found a hostel to sleep in for the night. I had a dream about Gary. He looked amazing, completely healthy and backlit, and was wearing a multicolored sweater. He looked at me with concern in his eyes, pointed backwards and said, "I'm not doing too good." I woke up a bit shaken because it felt so real. I told my girlfriend about the dream and she asked if I needed to call my mom to see how he was doing. I told her that it wasn't necessary because I knew they would call me if Gary passed. That day we drove from Utah to Colorado and stayed in another hotel. About 5 a.m. I woke up and my phone was ringing. I could see that it was my mom and I already knew what she was going to tell me. She broke the news that Gary had passed and I basically explained to her that Gary came and told me goodbye. I'm tearing up Earl right now writing this. The picture that his wife picked for his obituary was Gary in that multicolored sweater he was wearing when he came to me in my dream. Working as night security for a small office at a sanitation plant. Building was a single entrance and you had to check in at the security station to get in or out. A worker shows up and checks in saying he needs to take care of a few things and grab some stuff. So I check in his ID and flip a few lights for him then go back about my business. Fast forward a few hours and my shift is about to end. I still haven't seen the guy come back. So I go patrol the building to find him and literally can't find him anywhere. He's not in any of the areas I turned lights on for him, no other lights are on, and he's not in any other rooms. I stop by security to see if we just missed each other and he's trying to leave, but nobody is there. I do a second patrol and still no signs. At this point I went to check cameras to see where he went, but he's not on a single camera except the one covering the entrance and security station. He turns down a hallway and never shows up on the next camera down said hall. At this point I logged it as an incident and GTFO right as the release shift showed up. Next day my boss calls me and says that worker had been on vacation out of state for several days and wouldn't return for several more. Nobody could offer any explanation to what happened. The only way I can explain this one is wishful thinking. My mom and dad were codependent and they liked it that way. They didn't want other people other than the kids. They were completely happy to be just wrapped up in each other. My dad died the day before his birthday in a hospice center. Afterwards, it was like he was still home. His touch lamp beside his recliner would go on by itself. The recliner would rock like someone was getting in it. And sometimes, my mom or my sister would hear my dad saying, "Honey, fix me a cold drink." That was exactly how he'd ask my mom to fill up his massive mug with Sprite over ice. My mother died less than a year and a half later. After my mother died, there was never another sign of either of them being there. They've been gone now for close to 14 years now. When I was a kid, about 10 to 12-ish, I was carrying a load of laundry upstairs home alone while mom was out doing errands. We have this weird carpet runner over our hardwood stairs that's only really attached at the top of the flight, but otherwise not fitted or secured to each individual stair, so naturally I step on an air bubble of carpet with my vision, obscured by the laundry and fall backwards, while bear hugging a bunch of blankets. I specifically remember thinking, "Welp, guess I'm about to die," while almost airborne with just my big toe left on the carpet when I felt two hands, one on either side of my shoulder blades, give me a firm shove that launched me back up on the step and diagonally against the stair rail. I assumed mom somehow silently came back early without announcing herself and turned around to thank her while still clinging to the railing, but no one was there. I scurried upstairs to put my things down while calling her name and walked the house afterwards to check if any doors were unlocked or if her car was there. I finally resorted to calling her cell, where she told me she was hitting up a few more stores. It still feels like there's a presence on that stairwell, like someone's watching, but in a protective way rather than sinisterly. When I was 9 or 10, it was a bad year. I was regularly physically and emotionally abused. But that year, I was sexually abused. On top of all that, I started having serious mental health issues. Well, when things were at their absolute worst, I started having dreams of this blonde lady telling me to hold on. That things would get better. It was so comforting and peaceful and continued as long as the extreme abuse continued. I didn't know who she was, I just figured I imagined her. Well, things finally simmered down and the dreams stopped. About a year later, mom was going through old photo albums and my blood freezes. I see the blonde woman from my dreams. I ask who she is. Turns out, it was an aunt I had who died shortly before I was born. Edit. Holy hell, thank you everyone for the kindness you all have shown. I'm tearing up. I didn't expect that. I'm almost 40 now, it was a long time ago. I still have scars, but I was lucky enough to get therapy when I got free from my family. I had a dream once about my high school best friend who had moved out of state and started a family. I hadn't seen her or spoken to her in at least 10 years and had never met her child except seeing pictures posts on Facebook and commenting on them. In my dream I was walking down a street at night and out of nowhere her little girl appears next to me and I asked her, "Where is your mama? Why are you by yourself?" I remember her taking me to some bushes near a random house on the street and finding my friend in bad shape, beaten up or something, on the ground, and I remember running to the door of the random house screaming for help and to call the police. This is all I can recall from a dream, but I think there may have been a little more. The next day, I wake up and think to myself, man, that was weird. Maybe I dreamt of her, because we had just spoken a little in comments of a Facebook post. I should send her a message. I go on about my day, go to work, get home later that day, and sit on my couch and scroll through Facebook. Bam. 1000 posts, rest in peace, etc. All of them tagged my friend and her daughter. I thought what in the actual FCK. At that point there was no information as to what had happened, so I thought it must have been a car accident or something. Over the course of the next few weeks to months, more and more information came out, and it was not an accident. My friend and her sweet baby had been murdered by some animal. I won't refer to them as a person. This happened about 5 years ago. I still remember the main parts of the dream vividly. I still am a little horrified that I had this dream that night. When it was happening, possibly. I haven't been able to tell anyone else about it either because just thinking about it gives me chills. Many years ago, my parents had separated and my father was planning on taking a trip across the country to California. He was pretty excited about it. I talked to him the day before he's leaving, wish him well and tell him I'll talk to him after he gets to California. The day of his trip, he calls me and tells me he decided last minute not to go. Refuses to really get into why. Just says he changed his mind. Seemed really odd for something that he had been planning for a couple months. That night I'm sitting at my girlfriend's house and we're watching the news and they report that US Air Flight 1493, the flight my dad was supposed to be on, collided with another aircraft while landing in Los Angeles. About 25% of the people on the flight were killed. Hard to know how my dad would have made out because it really depended on where you were sitting, front versus back of the plane. It was several months before he finally told me that night before he was supposed to leave, he had an extremely vivid dream that he died in a fiery plane crash. So vivid that it scared him out of flying that day. My dad is a Marine Corps Vietnam veteran who saw combat. I can only imagine how vivid the dream must have been to scare him out of getting on that plane that morning. Early into my now wife and I's relationship, I had a dream about her in childbirth. Very vivid and long. Like I spent days in the hospital with her and everything was in a strange twilight. When it came time to deliver, things went very wrong and she and baby ended up passing away. I woke up quite shook naturally, but brushed it off. I am a nurse and have had to deal with traumatic OB situations before, and I chalked it up to me dealing with that stress through a dream. 6 years later, and my wife is pregnant. I have forgotten the dream by now. I get a call late into the 3rd trimester while I am on shift. Wife is going to the ER for a bad BP. I get off my shift and go to meet her. As soon as I step into the room I remember my dream. It's the same damn room. Which is extra spooky because the hospital we were at wasn't even built when I had the dream. This is last year, right when lockdown started. My wife has admitted they want to wait a week to deliver if possible. She will be kept in a twilight state until that time. So it's me in this room eerily isolated as the world around us is frozen and my wife is incoherent mere feet away. Lingering for days in this room I brushed off my showtime. My wife gets ready to begin pushing and it's exactly the same scenario as my dream. Things start going poorly, but the doctor thinks delivery is still possible, but at this point I finally freak out into full panic and demand a C-section for my wife. The doctor, I can tell, wants to argue, but I think my outburst made her step back and reassess the situation and she made the call for emergency C-section. Took 10 minutes for me to get taken back and as I'm in the OR I see my baby come out lifeless. They do everything they can and manage to resuscitate her. In the meantime my wife is doing poorly and they are scrambling to control her bleeding. I follow the baby out knowing there's really nothing I can do. Baby gets life flighted to another hospital, but before we go I see my wife stable and headed to the ICU. Both my wife and baby are critical, but alive. Today they are both thriving and my baby is 16 months and just a tornado of energy. I don't know that they would be alive if not for that dream and it causing me to freak out and demand a change in plan. When I was going to my family's home I got in a SUV going down the road. This was in Bangladesh at the time and after taking the SUV the next 2 hours would be a highway going down a forest. I was sitting shotgun and along the highway there was an old man walking down the highway. He was hitchhiking and the driver decided to pick him up. He insisted on sitting in my seat and obliged as he was an older man. About an hour down the drive our car collided with a bus and the shotgun seat was mangled up. We all got out and we looked around, but we couldn't find the old man that insisted on taking my seat anywhere. Stories like these aren't rare, but I didn't believe them. We all know the man sat in my seat and we all saw him. But he was nowhere to be found. Edit. He just vanished. No blood. He was wearing ethnic attire which isn't peculiar around that area. He didn't speak at all and we didn't ask him anything either. He just said to drop him off at the market ahead, which would be in the town my house was in. Only thing that was weird was that he spoke in an oldish Bengali. Like old Bengali that we'd see in poetry from the 1800s. I didn't see it as peculiar cause he seemed like an ascetic. I have an idea of what may have happened, but I cannot definitively say how this happened. My father died in 2000 in my parents' house. I was over one night pretty late after my mother had gone to sleep. I swear I could feel my father's presence as I was right in the spot where he had died. They believe he had a heart attack while laying on the couch, tried to get off the couch to call for help but fell on the floor and died, though no one else was home when it happened. I was on the couch when this happened. Anyway, I thought to myself, this is stupid. People don't leave essences behind, I'm not feeling anything. So, I say out loud, if this is really you, Dad, knock a box of cereal off the shelf onto the floor. I wanted to pick something I didn't think could happen by accident. I went into the kitchen and watched the shelf with the cereal on it for a few minutes and nothing happened. Since it was almost midnight, I decided to sleep in my old bedroom. I woke up the next morning and went downstairs and a box of cereal was laying on the floor. I said to my mother, did you knock that cereal onto the floor? She said no, it was like that when she woke up. So, what the fuck, man. However, my mother had a cat. I'm guessing the cat did it, but I don't know for sure. If she'd gotten on the shelf, everything would have been knocked around and messy from her. Everything else was in its normal position, just a box of cereal was on the floor. I mean, regardless, it has to have been the cat, right at it. My mother also told me, months before this happened, that she felt my father get in bed with her one night after he died. She said, go away, Greg. You're dead. You don't need to go to bed anymore. And she says she felt him get out of the bed after that. Weird. My mother despised my father by the end of his life, though they remained married. It's not surprising she told him to GTFO. Already posted this a year and a half ago, but will go again. I have to make a bit of a premise. When I was little, the woman that came to clean my house, I'll call her Mary, while my parents were working, was also my babysitter. Usually after she ended up cleaning, she would bring me to her house until my mom would come and pick me up. There during the year I knew her whole family, among these was her husband, that I'll call Dave. So Dave was a pretty cool guy, just the average elder you would find in any rural town. He liked to drink wine with his friends at the bar, go hunting, and he had a lot of good and interesting stories to tell me when I was a kid, and after all these years spent together, he basically considered me as a grandson. Now, back when COVID hit for the first time in my country, I had a dream one night where Mary was coming to my house to clean as every other week, but this time in my living room there was a closed black coffin. When I asked her what was in there, she looked at me and said in a sad tone, Dave is inside there. Now, if that wasn't strange enough, I remember waking up later that night and feeling a presence to the side of my bed, and I distinctly remember to have said, while still being half asleep, come on Dave, let me get back to sleep. Next morning when I woke, my parents told me that Mary had called saying that Dave had passed that night due to COVID complication. To this day I still haven't told anyone about it, and I am still a bit freaked out from the whole story. Also, sorry for format and grammar, but I'm on mobile and English isn't my first language. In high school, I was getting peer pressured into doing something I didn't want to do and would have gotten in a lot of trouble had a teacher come by, but I felt I didn't have a choice. I distinctly remember asking in my head, if I have a guardian angel right now, please fucking pull the fire alarm or something. Kid you not? At that exact second, the fire alarm went off. This never happened at this school. It was so unlikely, I didn't expect it to actually happen. Nearly shit my pants. We immediately went to the assembly area along with the rest of the school, and I got out of the situation. Turns out at that moment someone in the school had accidentally triggered the fire alarm. I spent the rest of the day in shock, honestly. If this counts as supernatural, but what even are the chances? That day introduced me to the idea of guardian angels, and I have had many similar occasions since then, where just in the nick of time, I've gotten out of potentially extremely bad situations, either due to insane luck or the nudge of something looking out for me. Edit. The thing I didn't want to do was that my friends wanted to smoke up. I had strict parents and the school had very strict drug policies, immediate expulsion. Also, I had never done a drug before and was scared and very uncomfortable. I wish it was something cooler and less lame. Woke up, needed to pee, went back to my room, and there was a thing next to my bed. I remember it was very dark and spindly, shaped almost like Gollum, and its legs bent backwards, and it seemed to have wisps of shadow coming off of it. I just stared at it for a few seconds before a woman's voice told me, this isn't for you to see, you should go get a glass of water. So I turned my ass around and went to get a glass of water. I was in the kitchen, now awake enough to think it through, and convinced myself that it was our black fluffy cat. But then when I went back to my room and saw that my parents' door was closed and remembered that they'd taken that cat in with them. I also remembered that I've seen that cat in the darkness before, and it doesn't look like weird Gollum, it looks like a bowling ball with stub feet. So then I assumed I just dreamed it. Well, when I got back to my room, the book that I'd been reading before bed and had left on the pillow next to me was sitting in the middle of my bedroom floor. I've told this story before on Reddit, and someone told me that they've seen the Gollum critter too. I believe they said it was under their bed and that it had a lot of teeth. I have quite a few actually. But one that happened pretty recently stands out. I grew up in a very rural area. Mostly crop farms everywhere. About a mile from my parents' house, there was this old abandoned farmhouse that all the area kids said was haunted. They would sneak into the house after dark, all the typical stupid kid crap, but I believe there are things in this world better left alone and never went. Years pass. The house fell into disrepair and was eventually torn down, leaving an old weathered barn. Well, I make a little side money selling photos of abandoned places, so I wanted to take a picture of the barn. I parked on the road and was walking up the drive. I made it about 10 feet before I just could not walk any further. My feet wouldn't move forward, my adrenaline spiked and I burst into tears. So I turned back and ran to my car. I didn't feel safe until I got past a nearby creek you have to cross to get there. I let it go, but a few months later we had to drive past the property after having Christmas dinner with my parents, and there was a creature standing in the drive. It reminded me of the fawn from Pan's Labyrinth, just super tall with a wide head and horns or antlers, but the eyes were more on the side of the head. Again, adrenaline kicked in and I burst into tears, but I was trying to keep it together because I didn't want to freak out my kids. My husband asked if I was okay. I just said, "You saw that, right?" "Yep." "Was it human?" "Nope." "I refuse to drive that road ever again." Yeah, I've got one of these back from when I went on holiday with my, then, wife and young son. We went to this place in Sicily, a small island just off of Italy. Sicily has got quite a rich history and we stayed in some modernized accommodation around there, but we were told the building was once an older building circa the Muslim years, 800-900 AD-ish. So my wife wanted to get away a bit because she had been dealing with a very difficult 2-year-old for the past 4 months, and this was her chance to relax. She went off to see the sights, went to some bars, etc. My son was fussy, so I stayed with him. The hotel we stayed in was eerie, and my son could not settle, so we went out for a while. When I got back, my wife was on the bed already changed. I settled my boy and laid down while my wife still sat there. She had drunk quite a bit during the day and I could tell as she swayed. She looked like she had seen a ghost. When I asked her if she was okay, she swears she could hear a faint shuffling and groaning in the hotel. I joked about whether it was a zombie. Then I heard it. Almost like a gasp and faint murmur. It wasn't my son as he was now resting, besides, it was too deep for a toddler to make. My wife was terrified, so I went to investigate, and the hotel staff told me about the history of war in the area and that sometimes people do hear things in the walls and around the rooms. For the rest of the week, we never heard anything again, but I will always remember that murmur which felt like it was in the room with us. Pretty sure we had an otherworldly experience that day.